Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about, some interesting news on the breaking side of things. Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, he says that today the FBI raided him and seized his cell phones. Yeah, I mean, duh. You gotta wonder, the guy who's been running around screaming all of this election denier stuff, that close to Trump, that much money, had to happen. And I guarantee, this is where my mind goes, I guarantee he wasn't smart enough to delete all of the crimes that he's probably been a part of. That's going to be my guess in this. And because of the arrogance, this is one of those things that is really right out in front. That there were so many people who, they believed that they were right, and they recorded their treason, they recorded their crimes, and they're going to be proud of it. Very, very, very interesting, especially now as the Justice Department is really, it's becoming more apparent just how much they're getting into all of what Trump and the brain trust were pulling from. The fraudulent electors, that scheme. We now know who delivered the fraudulent electors to Representative Kelly. The push for all of these baseless claims of all of this fraud and all this. Now we look back, kind of fantasy, and I go back to the kangaroo hearing that Doug Mastriano had in Gettysburg. After the election, where they had Donald Trump on the phone, speaking into a microphone, into the phone, just rambling. And all of the people who quote unquote testified without being under oath, because they had to know people were going to lie. Because it's easy when you don't put your hand on the book that they so cherish and promise to swell the truth, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help them, the God that they claim to love. And I look at all of this, and they're digging into the money, which for me, from the beginning, that was the focus. I'm not so much worried about the guy urinating on desks and dumping on the floor. I'm not so much worried about the guys breaking windows. Not the dupes, they'll get theirs. They're gonna get theirs. It's the moneyed interests that I have always been interested in, and exposing that. And maybe it's going to happen. Also, the FBI has arrested the Republican County Board of Elections Commissioner in Rensselaer County, New York. Evidently, they picked him up outside of his residence Tuesday morning and charged with fraudulently obtaining and possessing absentee ballots. Their information that at least 8 voters without their permission, he had these ballots. And you go, why? Oh yeah, because what they do is right. Yeah, interesting times. And the hope is that to the bottom of it. Because for me, the part that's always been interesting is how they claim there's all this fraud going on, yet all of the fraud and all of the tampering seems to be coming from one side of the political aisle, the one that pointing their finger at everybody else. So there you go. Also news, Donald Trump, former president, not going to be invited to the Queen's funeral in London. That's been confirmed, and you go, wow, there's a shocker. Also a major shocker, Vladimir Putin not going to be invited. So, anybody surprised? No, nobody's surprised that neither of them are going to be invited to the funeral. Nor should they. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Good thing, though, Donald Trump has found religion, it appears. He has found the Q. Evidently, he's tweeted out some Q stuff, him wearing a Q lapel pin overlaid with the Q phrase of the storm is coming and the WWG1 WGA thing. Put that on his Truth Social. So he was truthing his cuteness. Jesus. That's just, well, it is what it is. Now, fun. You may remember back in May. Today was an interesting day for me. While the president, signed the Inflation Reduction Act and all the good things that have come with that, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. You had Lindsey Graham. Now, you may remember back in May, before the Supreme Court made their decision on Roe, you may remember, Graham coming out and saying that, if the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, which he believes was one of the largest power grabs in the history of the court, he says it means that every state will decide if abortion is legal and on what terms. It's going to be a states' right thing, right? Remember that? Do you remember that argument that conservatives have been making? And you look at, West Virginia. West Virginia today, one of the states that is now prohibiting nearly all abortions. They've passed a law that's going to do that. We'll see what happens with their governor. But it is a massive veto-proof majority, 22-7 in the Senate, 78-17 in the House. Basically, that's going to happen. So you can put, see, the states' rights. It's states' rights. The states are doing it. Interesting that today, Lindsey Graham decides that he's going to propose and put forth a national 15-week abortion ban. Going to do that immediately. Going to move forward on that because hey, remember when our friends in the Republican Party claimed to love the states' rights and be tenthers, only to then use the power that they claim to abhor to do just what they want. Now, this is one of those moments where truly believe them when they tell you who they are. This idea that they care about states' rights, they care about individual rights. No, they care about power. And this is what's kind of frightening on a whole nother level, because we're moving in a direction where authoritarianism seems to be running really deep in the GOP. This kind of the F word, the bundling of sticks, if you will, the fascism that seems to be a common thread right now in the grand old party. And that the voters who, and this is the most ironic part in all this, the people who talk about liberty and use the word freedom so well always, are the ones who are willing to give that up. And there's that Ben Franklin quote, those who are willing to give up freedom for security deserve neither. There's that. But there are these folks who are willing to give up their liberty and freedom for, power to punish the others. And this is one of those things where you go, once you give that power up to punish the others, eventually it's going to turn around and do what? Oh, that's right, punish you. And this is what we used to understand as a country. Maybe not so much anymore. Maybe we've been so blinded by our hatred and our divisions that haven't looked in the mirror recently. Haven't thought about, once this power happens, once we allow this kind of stuff to happen, it turns around and bites us. So I'm curious, thoughts? 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Are we in upside down land? Did we fall into the rabbit hole? Because I seem to remember a Republican Party that I at one point had respect for. One that believed in personal responsibility, one that believed in fiscal responsibility, one that believed in strong defense and institutions. Conservatism was about conserving institutions. The institutions that supposedly made our country great, only to now be the party that's tearing them to shreds and distrustful of every one of them. And I find that ironic because, again, conservatism was always about saving institution. It was always the liberals who were saying, no, institutions are bad. Tear down those walls. We need freedom. Weird kind of juxtaposition. But in an interesting time. And in a time when, inequality is still at enormous levels. We're right where the Gilded Age was. But interestingly enough, workers are saying, hey, we've had enough. We're going to start demanding better. And we're in interesting times. Like they say, may you live in interesting times. Welcome. Interesting times. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. Remember, podcast. Make sure you download the podcast. Share it with your friends. I know, you sound like a broken record. Yeah, download the podcast. By all means. Back after this.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our Labor History in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. Generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Jenna sent me an email during the break pointing out something that I hadn't thought about. Said that, the good thing is that the MyPillow guy, Mike Lindell, his pillow empire seems to be kind of in trouble, given the fact that we haven't seen any TV ads or heard any radio ads for over a year now. And its last physical store just shut down. Now, I didn't know that. But how do you go from being a guy who's a billionaire and having, really almost nearly unlimited resources to, pillow empire gone? I guess you go completely off the fringe, the deep end. Sad stuff there. Especially with all of the things that he's been. This is one of those things where you go, we do need help as a nation. Maybe it was the pandemic that caused some mental health issues. I'm not sure, but maybe this is some policy we can be working forward on. Some news coming out of Minnesota. There is a 3-day strike that started on Monday of nurses, about 15,000 of them across the 7 healthcare systems in Minnesota and Duluth, in Minneapolis and Duluth, affecting 15 hospitals, where the nurses are going, look, we've basically had enough. Something's got to give, as their shirts are saying. Something's got to give. Administrators have got to do more work in helping, because it can't all continue to fall on the nurses. And look, the nurses, and the support staff, they're saying, look, we need better wages, hours, conditions. The reason they unionized in the first place. Now, remember, these are the folks who understand. These are the folks who, during the pandemic, we called heroes, and we did. They weren't even essential. They were heroes. These are the people who were wearing trash bags instead of having the proper PPE. These are people who were wearing masks and smearing the inside with hand sanitizer so that the masks would last longer because, oh, by the way, they didn't have enough of them. These are, again, the heroes. And you now have these hospital systems saying, no, we're not going to treat you with the dignity and respect that you demand. And what I always find interesting is in these moments, these hospital systems seem to always have money to hire scab nurses to come in during these strike moments. And this is the crazy part of this. Because when they bring in these scab nurses to cross the picket lines, they're paying them 3, 4, 5 times what they pay the regular nurses. Why not oh, I don't know, why not take that money and go, we're going to spend it anyway, and actually sit down and negotiate in good faith? I look at the strike that happened in Massachusetts, where you had at St. Vincent's up in Massachusetts, where the hospital system, I think, spent it was millions of dollars, an outrageous sum of money, just to deny those nurses dignity, because it's a power play more than anything. And part of what we're doing in October when we commence our tours is figuring out, hey, how do we as a working class come back together and support each other as we demand better? I got an email today, someone asking the question, how did we go from a middle class society where the middle class was the biggest part of our economy, where we were a diamond-shaped economy, where you had some rich people, you had some poor people, but the mass of folks were there somewhere in the middle. The mass of folks were doing well. They were making ends meet. They were doing all this stuff. And the question is how is it that we're the most productive workers in the world and yet working longer and harder to make ends meet? How is that possible? And I think we have to go back and again, I'm going to be hammering on this because I think it's important. I've talked about neoliberalism over the years. I've talked about horrible trade policies. I've talked about horrible tax policies. I've talked about horrible deregulation. All of this stuff is what contributed to the demise of the working class. And before someone goes, no, it's one side. No, it's both parties. Republicans were the ones leading the way. They're the ones where the bad ideas came, and some corporate Democrats go, yeah, sounds like a good idea. This is one of those moments where, labels aside, this isn't right or left. I don't care what hat you bought. The reality is it's up, down. It's the people sitting in those corporate boardrooms. It's the ivory tower folks in the penthouse looking down on the rest of us. It's those folks versus the rest of it. It's the Occupy Wall Street, the 99% versus the 1%. And yes, if you're listening to this program, I guarantee you are part of the 99%. You are part of the class that's working harder, longer, being more productive, and yet struggling more than your grandparents' generation did. That's reality. And for me, the conversation has to be had of how we move in the right direction. And I think right now, with some of the policies coming out of the Biden administration, I think he is starting us down a path that is the right path. Investing in our country, rebuilding our infrastructure, investing in manufacturing, reshoring those jobs, and having the national security ability to produce our own war machine. It's always been insane to me. And I'm talking for almost all 17 years of doing this program. It's always been insane to me that we're a war society. We like our wars, and yet we don't produce our entire war machine. Chips being a huge part of this. The fact that the CHIPS bill got passed and we're going to reshore manufacturing these little tiny little computer brains. This is enormous, because you're going to make your smartphones, and you're going to make your computers, and you're going to make your cars be able to talk to each other, but you're going to also have the smart chips that make your smart bombs smart. So you don't have to go to the Chinese if anything bad ever happens, going, I know we're at war with you, but could you spare some of those chippy things? We'd like to have the big bombs find you. You think they're going to buy into it? Of course not. This is one of those times where we'd better wake up. And this is where you listen to the Christian white nationalists, you listen to the Republicans who are out there spewing this kind of hatred and vitriol that you get from the Mastrianos of the world, from the Q types of the world. You don't hear them talk about trade. You don't hear them, and you go, this should be, if you're a nationalist, this should be a natural place for you to go, Yeah, we like our hatred, and all that, but we also like manufacturing. Not so much. Now, interestingly enough, President Biden said that, look, if Republicans win the midterms, if they win Congress in the midterms, he said if we lose the House or lose the Senate, it's going to be a really difficult 2 years. He said, I'll be spending more time with the veto pen than getting anything done. And that's true. And this is why I said from yesterday, and I've been saying for a while, we're at a crossroads moment. And understand, Republicans understand this as well. They know this better than anyone. Once these policies get rolled out, once people start saying, oh yeah, they fixed the road. Hey, I like that. Hey, they rebuilt that bridge. That's good. They invested in our infrastructure. Our water's clean. We're not having giant sinkholes swallowing up buses. This is good stuff. Who's doing this? Oh yeah, that was that Biden guy. It was him. It was those Democrats we're told to hate. And once we start bringing those jobs back and creating manufacturing again and having communities across this country thriving, main streets being unboarded and filled with shops and opportunity, they're going to ask, this is what they know. People are going to go, well, how'd that happen? Smart policy, which is why I think it's so important to understand that bad policy is what got us here. Bad tax policy, bad trade policy, that's what got us here. Deregulation. You go back to the late 70s. The Carter era deregulation was horrible. And yes, it was Jimmy Carter who deregulated trucking and the airline industry. But it was Reagan who put the pedal to the metal and made sure that we're going to break up those unions. Make sure we ruin the collective bargaining rights of thousands, of hundreds of thousands of workers. And in the airline industry, make sure we steal their pensions to boot. That history needs to be retold again and again to where maybe we remember. And then maybe we don't do it again. But as I've been saying, we're at a crossroads. While I like the fact that we're talking about infrastructure and have a bill that's going to do some of that, it's not nearly enough. While we're talking about reshoring manufacturing, not nearly enough. Production of solar panels and batteries and the technology of the future, not enough. We're one election away from having all of that stripped out and continuing down the trickle-down Reaganomic lane, which means, well, working harder and longer for less because workers have no power, which means a middle class that continues to morph into the working poor because, well, the gig economy is the rise of the working class. And I don't think that's the way we want to go. So this election to me is a big one. This is about the future. This is about moving us in a direction that when our grandkids ask us, what did you do? We can say we made the right choice. My parents' generation can't make that claim. 1980 was a horrible choice, which is why we have to make the right ones. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day Rhode Island Governor Theodore Green demanded that federal troops be sent to crush a textile strike in his state. The general textile strike, then in its second week, stretched across the Piedmont from New England to Georgia. Green declared, quote, "We are face to face not with a textile strike, but with a communist uprising." His demands came after days of pitched battles between thousands of strikers and the Rhode Island National Guard in Salesville and Woonsocket. Secretary of War George Dern assured the governor and the press that 3,000 combat troops were ready and available for immediate duty in Rhode Island. President Franklin Roosevelt declined to send in federal troops, but the state assembly authorized the governor to close the mills and appropriated $100,000 in funds to beef up state police forces. The governor then directed Rhode Island's police chiefs to round up all communists on charges of inciting riots in textile centers across the state. It gave local authorities the pretext to round up and arrest over 200 alleged agitators, strike leaders, militants, and radicals. Over the course of 4 days, 3 strikers had been killed, including Charles Gorsinski at Salesville and Jude Cordomenci at Woonsocket. Hundreds had been seriously injured in the 2 cities. 7 of the 16 strikers who had been shot by state troops were near death. State National Guardsmen had been given the shoot-to-kill order to protect the mills and the scabs. Once the governor shut down the mills, police forces easily arrested dozens of flying squadron picketers and established martial law-like conditions, though it was never officially established. Within days, the strike would be quelled in Rhode Island.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
What makes a newspaper great? Many say it's having street-savvy reporters and editors with the integrity to shine the light of investigative journalism on the power structure's abuses. But no, says Fred Ryan, top executive of the Washington Post. The secret is attendance. Ryan, a corporate manager and former Ronald Reagan staffer, was handpicked to be CEO of the legendary paper by Jeff Bezos in 2014 when the Amazon billionaire bought the Post. But on Ryan's watch, readership is in decline, which he blames on newsroom sluggards who don't spend enough time in the office. So he's become the hall monitor, measuring reporters' productivity by their office attendance. Fred seems unaware that a good reporter's real work is out on the beat, not sitting in front of a computer. No doubt he would have fired Woodward and Bernstein for being out of office so often to meet with Deep Throat to uncover Nixon's Watergate scandal. In fairness, though, he apparently has a 2-part plan to boost team spirit. 1, eliminate 100 reporters. And 2, judge the output of those remaining by counting the number of video conferences they attend each week. But that's hardly the totality of Ryan's innovations. The big news is that he's hired not 1 but 2 high-dollar PR firms to create a cutting-edge, quote, branding strategy for the Post. Already, they've come up with a spiffy new corporate slogan, "We don't just break news, we break ground." Wow, how great is that? Never mind that some wags have changed the second line to "We break wind." This is Jim Hightower saying, when overpaid incompetents like Ryan substitute slogans and computer metrics for real solutions, they're admitting that they are the problem. They don't know how to motivate and manage a creative workforce. They should resign in embarrassment.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the big news today, the president, signed that little Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest investment in clean energy in our country's history. That is a steal of Bidenism. It's a big blanking deal. At least I think it is. And like I said, I think we're at a moment where this is good stuff. We're moving in the right direction. Sadly, one election could, just like 1980, rip those solar panels right off the roof, rip those investments right out from under us. Elections have consequences. Anyway, we're here to share some thoughts on the big signing and maybe what it's going to mean for us as a nation to finally be moving in that direction. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is great to be with you, especially this evening.
No, so this is big. This is a big freaking deal, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, this obviously passed in August. It took a long time to get there. It certainly wasn't the bill that anybody writing it would have written that bill, but that is the art of compromise, right? And there was a ton of good stuff in it. And the president, surrounded by a lot of folks who worked over the decades to make it happen, and his cabinet were able to celebrate and also to share exactly what this means to the American people, because at the end of the day, this is obviously more than about legislative accomplishment. It's about making our country a better place, addressing a serious crisis, which is the climate crisis, and doing it in a way that's going to be additive from a jobs perspective in the United States rather than subtractive. And I think that's the important thing. And so some of the data is just unreal to think about. And you mentioned exactly the right concern, Rick, which is, we invented solar technology in the 50s. We installed it on the White House during the Carter administration, and Reagan took him down, and he took down the policy too. And it has taken us a hell of a long time to recover.
Yeah, here we are 42 years later, still on the wrong path. And I fear we're at that moment, because one of the things that this administration has done, and again, none of this stuff is perfect. I think if you were to write the bill, if I were to write the bill, it would be much bigger, much chunkier, more aggressive. At least I think so. I know if I were writing it would be, but we're heading in that direction of reshoring manufacturing, of talking about those jobs being good union jobs, of maybe, of national security issues of manufacturing. This to me is the right path. And I fear, just like I said, one election, they could rip the rug out from underneath us.
Yeah, they could. And so I think it's important for Democrats and for others who support this legislation and this policy to talk about what it's going to mean for our country, what it's going to mean for jobs, because I think it is important. And one thing that I would have written into the bill, that's in the bill, actually, is that this stuff has to be made in America. Okay. And I think that's the important thing. So the solar panels, the heat pumps, the electric vehicles, in order to get the full benefit, both the manufacturers and the consumers, it's got to be made in the United States. And so that means that this is going to be an investment that's going to create jobs here. And we are talking about 950 million new solar panels installed over the next 7 or 8 years. We're talking about 120,000 new wind turbines installed, 2,300 grid-scale battery plants to store clean energy. And a lot of this equipment and the parts thereof, like think of the metal for the wind turbines, is going to come from the United States of America, from our factories right here. And that's going to generate a huge amount of jobs. And if that doesn't impress you, I'll just leave you with this. People who take advantage of the clean energy vehicle tax credit for qualifying vehicles are going to save close to $1,000 a year just in fuel and maintenance costs once they make that change. And again, you can get a $7,500 tax credit for a fully qualifying vehicle. When you do that, to help offset some of the cost of that EV as well. So this is this is going to help in so many different ways. Going to help the climate, going to help jobs. Ultimately, is going to help the pocketbooks as well to bring down energy costs or fuel costs, which is obviously a concern that is top of mind for a lot of people right now.
Now, I continually am hit by people saying, well, that's all great what you said, Scott. It's great that there's a tax credit for rich people to buy these fancy electric cars. It's great that they're going to save money. But for the working class, the people who can't afford these cars, what's going to happen to them? I've had people point to California that they're not going to allow, the sales of gas vehicles after a certain point and all of this stuff. There is a concern. Are we doing anything to address the bottom of the scale? Because look, folks at the bottom are already struggling, working longer and harder for less, more productive than any other generation before us, and still not making ends meet. What are we doing for them?
That's 100% correct. And that is a valid, legitimate concern up to this point about a lot of these EVs being out of the price range for most Americans. Absolutely true. In 2 years, that's not going to be true. Okay, there's going to be dozens of new vehicles coming online. They're going to be at a comparable price point to combustion engine vehicles. There's going to be, again, a $7,500 tax credit that will offset some cost for that. And again, you'll generate about $980 worth of savings in maintenance and gas every year from that EV conversion.
Is it going to be that quick? I mean, do you think
Yeah.
do you think this is going to ramp up that quickly, and we're going to have that transition that quickly?
Yeah, you know how this works. I mean, and we saw this with smartphones too, right? I mean, first it was, there's the few people, and it's like, well, that looks weird. I wonder what's going on there. And then a few more people, and then all of a sudden, everybody wants them. Okay, and I think the fact that Ford, GM are leaning in with the Lightning F-150, which is the F-150's most popular brand in the United States of America, is going to go a long way to help here as well. And so look, this is not, again, this isn't going to happen overnight, but by 2030, I think you're going to be surprised. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by how many of these cars we see, not only in Washington and New York and Silicon Valley and Los Angeles, but all over the Midwest and elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm hoping you're right. I'm hoping the transition is quickly moved through. I'm hoping it's painless as painless as it can be, and we make that transition, because I think it's important. But again, this is policy that's moving us in a direction that I think is ultimately going to be good for us. I mean, there's some questions I still have, but I think we're right. I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. And just one last point on this, because I think this is also very important. When this bill was passed, we immediately saw companies announce new investments in the United States. First Solar announced an expansion of a factory in Toledo, Ohio, and also going to put another one in. You saw others in the EV space do the same thing, just as you saw semiconductor makers say, we're going to open new factories after the CHIPS Act passed as well. And so this is policy that has a positive outcome. And so there's a real negative consequence for anybody who wants to reverse these policies, because the odds are, for a lot of these factories, they will stop construction and they will turn around and they will invest somewhere else if these policies aren't continued. And so Joe Biden is doing the right thing. We're seeing the fruits of it already with all these. I mean, my God, Rick, there's so many factory openings that they can't send enough cabinet officials out to them. I mean, whoever thought that would be the case? It's really kind of crazy that you had one in Idaho, one in Ohio, and one down in North Carolina, and one in Indiana, and there were barely enough cabinet secretaries to cover it all. So it is really, really a big deal for American manufacturing.
I mean, why don't we hear enough of this? Why don't we hear more of this? I mean, because the only frames I'm getting, the right-wing media, which is extremely powerful, all it is a constant drumbeat of negative and division and tearing us apart, and I don't hear any of this stuff anywhere else.
Yeah, and I guess this is the thing too. If you go like I do, and my team does, and I know like you do from time to time as well, to these communities, even in red states, but these small and mid-sized communities that were swing voters and then kind of turned redder, right? I mean, the factories in these towns are turning around. They're hiring people. They're paying good wages. There is a lot of revival. And I don't mean to sweep problems under the rugs, because there still are challenges that we have to face. But there is also an extraordinary turnaround that you're right, that doesn't make the headlines, because unfortunately that partisan divisive media wants to talk about more of the challenges that we face than the opportunities that we have and the progress that's been achieved, because they don't want to give Biden credit for anything at all, just because of who he is. Now, if this was happening in a Trump administration, they'd be all over it.
Yeah, but, no, I've been saying for a while we should get remember those idiotic stickers they were putting on the gas pump? Biden did this, pointing.
Yeah,
I would get big 15-foot cardboard cutouts and put them at every one of these factories. Yep, Biden did this. His policies did this, and oh, by the way, vote the wrong way in November, all this could go away. That's, to me, something that needs to be done. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Scott Paul. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Now, you mentioned the CHIPS Act, which, again, hugely important in my view, something that I've been screaming about for years, because, how can you have smart bombs that need smart chips if you don't actually make the chips? And I've said, look, if we ever get into a throwing bombs at each other kind of thing with China, are we going to go, hey, we'd like some of those chippy things, please, so we can bomb you with? Not going to probably work. So the fact that Biden is now doing this, and we're actually talking about curbing some of the stuff with China and pulling back, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's a couple of policies that have to go hand in hand to make this work. And part one was obviously the investing in the United States to make it possible to scale up the semiconductor manufacturing again in the United States. We used to make almost 1 out of 3 semiconductor chips that were consumed in the world. They were made in the United States in the early 90s. That shifted first to Japan, then also to Taiwan and other Asian countries, and finally to China. And now we make only about 7% of the chips that are produced in the United States. The policies that Biden put into place will get us back up to 20% of the world's production of semiconductors, which is about what we consume. So that makes a lot of sense. But and there's a big but here. The challenge is China. As much money as we are investing in semiconductors, China is tripling that to try to gain more semiconductor production, and most importantly, Rick, to try to gain the latest technology, because the Chinese semiconductors, for the most part, are a couple of generations behind. Okay, and so the issue is these global companies, some of whom are investing in the United States, they also sometimes have investments in China, but you don't want that the latest technology to get to China, because it will be transferred immediately
and misused.
That's right, to the state-owned firms, and they'll subsidize it, and they'll once again wash our guys out of the market. And so the Commerce Department is preparing some export controls on semiconductor chip technology because of the unfortunate security threat that the Chinese Communist Party is having on the United States right now.
And this is where I want to wrap this up, because that security part is what frightening me. And I don't want to sound paranoid or conspiratorial, but a lot of what we do, these chips are reliant on. Our smartphones, all of our electronics, our cars are going to be are heavily chipped, and going to be even more so. I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't really get all of the things that these chips can do, but I got to think that having control of them, possibly programming them in a different way, I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with the Communist Party of China having the ability to have that kind of control over things that I own and I use. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah, you're not paranoid, because, first of all, the Chinese Communist Party is doing it to their own citizens, and particularly to ethnic groups that they have that they want to go away, like the Tibetans and the Uyghurs. And it extends to everything from DNA collection to facial recognition, to obviously monitoring every step on the internet, to a social credit system that they're developing. And they do this to adversaries abroad too, and there's no doubt about it. And so it is it is not paranoid, and it is not anti-Chinese. It is not anti-Asian. It is concern about the practices of the Chinese Communist Party, and those practices hit actually ethnic Chinese people more than anybody else. Okay, particularly those who disagree with the Chinese Communist Party's doctrine. But the least we can do is make sure that we're not enabling and weaponizing this technology through the semiconductor chips so that the Chinese Communist Party can continue its surveillance state or whatever it wants to do. We need to be responsible and say, if you want that technology, you got to try to develop it on your own. But we're not going to help you do it.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. But a good day overall. As I've said, I would have liked to have seen more. I would like to have seen bigger, chunky. But this is huge. We're going in the right direction. It's now incumbent on us to make sure that we continue on this path and do more in the future. But Scott, I appreciate the time as always. Great stuff. Keep up the great work.
All right. Right back to you, Rick. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Anytime. Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Make sure you check out their website, americanmanufacturing.org. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break. Right back with your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. Right back.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1971. That was the day that the state police stormed Attica Correctional Facility in New York. 4 days earlier, the inmates had taken over the prison. One guard was killed. The guards were members of AFSCME Council 82. The prisoners demanded improvements to their brutal living conditions in the overcrowded prison. Police retook most of the prison, but the inmates held guards hostage in cell block D. One of the prisoners, Elliot James Barkley, explained the takeover. "We are men, we are not beasts, and we do not depend to be beaten or driven as such. The entire prison populace, that means each and every one of us here, have set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disrespect for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States." When the police stormed the prison, they dropped tear gas from helicopters. They fired 3,000 rounds, firing on prisoners and hostages indiscriminately. They killed 29 inmates and 10 hostages. Police claimed the prisoners had killed the hostages. They also accused the inmates of committing atrocities against the guards. Public outrage swelled against the inmates, including racially charged hate directed at the black prisoners. But autopsies proved that all of those killed had been felled by police bullets. Attica became the rallying cry for those concerned about prison conditions. It has been referenced by many in movies and songs, including John Lennon's Attica State. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I'll tell you, the part that's kind of concerning, especially on the chips front, and look, we've got to do something on the chips front, and forthright, giving the Chinese access to all of our smart devices. That's frightening. The fact that they would dominate the production of this essential thing is frightening on so many, and should scare us all. And the weird thing is I don't think there were enough people. That should have been one of those bills that got everybody on board. It should have been one of those bills that everybody voted for. 100-0, 435-0. That's what it should have been. But sadly, we're in this really, really bizarre divided place. And as I said, this election is really about, are we heading down the right path? Are we going after the right policies? Are we making good choices? An example, I think doing some of the debt forgiveness is a good policy forward. Focusing on people on the middle to lower end of the debt scale, forgiving some of it. I think they should have done more. I would have done it differently. I would have bought up all the loans. I would have made people pay back what they borrowed at a minimal interest rates, and done away with all of the really draconian fines and fees and all of that stuff, so that the fairness would have been, hey, you took out $10,000, you got to pay $10,000 back. Instead of this, yeah, you're going to pay $10,000, you're going to take out $10,000, and over the life of the loan, you're going to have to pay back, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 because bad things happened. You had to stop, making payments because you lost your job or whatever. You've now got almost half of the governors in this country who have signed on to this idea that Biden shouldn't do this. It's bad. Because they're claiming, and you got to love the simplistic mentality, the simplicity of their arguments. Because they take the big number of the debt forgiveness, and then they divide it by all the number of people, and they say, oh, you working stiff, you now have to pay, I think the number they threw out was $2,500. So everybody's taking on $2,500 debt to fund these spoiled rich kids. That's the frame, isn't it? The frame is you're being saddled with $2,500 debt so you can pay for your boss's education. That's how they're framing it. Never mind that a lot of this debt are working class people's kids. These are working class people who got got jobs as as LPNs and as truck drivers and as cosmetologists, and you go down the list of things that loans were given out to get. But their frame, and they do this masterfully, is that of the class war, while saying there's no such thing as class war. Yeah. Now the reality is somebody's going to pay for it, and it's going to be the wealthy who are the ones who, like it or not, we have given so much to. I had a conversation the other day with a guy who brought this up, and I said, do you have any idea what the tax rates of the past were? Because they bought the frame that, we're taxed enough already. We're the most taxed people in the history of the country. And when you go, no, we're nowhere near taxed what our grandparents' generation was. The 1950s, a very high tax rate. 1953, the top marginal tax rate, 92%. 92%. It's now 36% for the same wealth. So that difference. Now, nobody paid 92%. They paid in the high 60s. Just like nobody's paying the 36%. They're paying, like Jeff Bezos, nothing. So where did that money come from? It came from working people. It saddled them with debt. It gave them less opportunities, less health care. Took from our infrastructure, and by the way, saddled the nation with a massive amount of debt itself. So we created the largest wealth class in the history of civilization by lower opportunities for our children and our generations of the future, lower opportunities for working people, less wages, less benefits, all of that, and saddled future generations with massive debt. But at least we've got rich people who have phallic rockets and can play with their big bathtub boats and thank the poor working stiffs for going to work every day and sacrificing so they can have these wonderful toys. This is the world that we're in. Until we in the working class wake up to the reality that we're getting screwed at every turn, and that all of the things that they throw at us are to divide and to tear us apart so that we're never looking at them, the sooner we figure this out, the sooner we pull our heads up from hating our neighbor, maybe we got a shot. Maybe we have a chance to recreate what my grandparents' generation did, a prosperous working class. Opportunities for future generations. And a cohesiveness that moved us forward as a country, didn't tear us apart. And this is why we're embarking on the tour. This is why we're going to go into red areas and blue areas, and we're going to take the hats off and talk about, hey, you remember the golden era? Remember clinging to that pride? We can do it again. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you think there's a city we should go to, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Also, remember, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you get yours, you'll find ours.
Flash flooding, debris flow causing big problems for firefighters, damaging their trucks and stranding drivers.
Torrential rains break historic California heat wave, capping a summer of extreme heat.
We are playing with fire.
All reactors shut down at besieged Ukrainian nuclear plant. Plus,
so today I ask my colleagues to stand up for our kids, for our grandchildren, and for future generations.
Looming showdown over energy permitting reform in Congress.
All of those showdowns and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
It's been a brutal week in this town. Oh, my God. It's like L.A. was like Death Valley with In-N-Out burgers. I mean...
True. I was here. This is your Green News Report.
People in this town are going to their hot yoga class to cool off.
Okay, Desi Doyen, we finally made it through the heat wave out here in Los Angeles, out here in California. It was terrible. It was endless, but it's finally ended.
Yes, we've had some extreme swings in extreme weather.
Yep.
In Los Angeles, dozens of motorists were rescued after getting trapped by a mudslide, just one of several caused by remnants of Hurricane K in the Pacific, which also helpfully ended the historic heat wave in the state.
We had to count on a hurricane to end our heat wave.
Dozens of wildfires sparked by the intense heat continue to rage on, however, in the Northwest, blanketing the region in hazardous smoke. That record-shattering 12-day heat wave in the western states capped a summer of unprecedented extreme heat waves across the entire northern hemisphere. In Europe, summer 2022 was the hottest ever recorded since records began in the 1800s, according to the EU's Climate Monitoring Service.
Gosh, I wonder how that happened.
A new study warns that the Middle East is warming up twice as fast as the rest of the planet, meaning that 400 million people in the region are likely to face even more intense heat waves, more severe drought, more frequent sandstorms, crop failures, and water shortages in coming decades, with profound impacts for the volatile region.
Luckily, they've got a lot of oil to sell so they can afford the air conditioning.
In other news, with the death of Queen Elizabeth in Britain, Prince Charles is now King Charles III. That has sparked questions about whether he will continue his decades-long advocacy for climate action and conservation in his new role.
He actually has been kind of a champion for the climate, right?
Since the 1970s.
I'm no fan of the monarchy, but I'm a fan of people who are good on climate.
But actual policy is set by the UK Parliament. In one of her first official acts, new Conservative Prime Minister Liz Truss ended England's ban on fracking, citing spiking energy costs triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Off with her head.
Truss also proposed freezing energy prices for 2 years and capping the energy bills of millions of households facing 80% price increases. Here in the U.S., a new study warns that rising seas are set to inundate millions of acres of our coastline within the next 30 years. The study by Climate Central combined tidal data with sea level rise projections and U.S. coastal property records to identify those most at risk.
Yeah, so it's not just property on the coast. It's actual houses and people who live there.
Yes, and the analysis found that nearly 650,000 individual privately owned parcels are projected to fall below changing tidal boundaries by 2050. The biggest impacts will be on the Gulf Coast and Atlantic coast.
Well, they've got a lot of oil to sell there, so I'm sure they can help pay for moving everyone off the coast.
In Congress, a big fight is brewing over permitting reform. Democrats are negotiating a bill to speed up the permitting process for various kinds of energy projects, both fossil and renewable, which was the price for getting Coal State Senator Joe Manchin's vote for President Biden's climate bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. Late last week, a third of congressional Democrats came out against reported provisions in the bill, which they said would harm low-income and indigenous communities. On the Senate floor, independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont expressed his strong opposition to the side deal.
I just ask you to think ahead 10, 15, 20 years. Think about the discussion you'll be having with your kids or your grandchildren when that young person looks you in the eye and says, Dad, Grandma, what did you do to save the planet?
Finally, some good-ish news. External power has been restored to Ukraine's besieged Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and employees have also successfully shut down the plant's last operating reactor. Russia's military actions in Ukraine repeatedly cut reliable external power supplies needed to prevent the reactors from overheating to the point of meltdown. The UN's International Atomic Energy Agency says both actions now significantly reduce the risk of a radiation disaster.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the news on Monday, President Biden and the administration reaching out to the freight rail companies and the unions that represent the workers who work on those rail, for those rail companies, saying, hey, how can we avoid a strike or a lockout? Look, I don't know where this is going to go. I'm being told could be either. Because, well, these very profitable railroads, they see that they've got the strength to be able to possibly crush this. Because, look, they're making tons of money, which doesn't make any sense to me. They're making tons of profit, and they can't make people's lives a little bit better. Well, here to share some thoughts on what the situation is, what it's looking like at this minute, I've asked Don Roach to come talk with us. Don is the Michigan State Legislative Director for the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transport Workers. Don, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's jump right into the mix. The Biden administration is kind of jumping into this. They clearly don't want a strike or a lockout because you're a huge part of our supply chain. What's going on? What are you seeing? What could you tell us?
Well, obviously, if you're reading the news, it's a distraction right now, right? The railroads are controlling the narrative, and it's unfortunate because people don't know the real story that's going on out there. Our members are suffering. They're being dismissed for missing work, for doctor's appointments. They can't spend time with their family, and it's just it's really hard to sit back and read some of these news stories and making the railroaders look like we're the problem here. And really, I hate to use the word victim, but it seems like a lot of our members are being victimized, and they're leaving in record numbers, really high quality jobs, career jobs, and it's sad to see, and it's sad to hear about too, because I'm a 25-year veteran myself, and there's been a lot of unsafe conditions that we've had to work through throughout the years, and they just keep getting worse, and they don't take care of the unsafe conditions. So there's a ton of things I could go into, but I don't know if we got time for
see, this is important because the frame I keep hearing reverberated on the right is, it's the time of crisis. Now's not the right time to address these issues. You're just being selfish and greedy. It's all your fault when you go, wait a second. It does take two to tango in this situation. There's blame that we should maybe be looking at on the other side. That maybe we're not in this frame that, hey, you and your members, you should just suck it up because, well, you're essential. You should be going to work. What do you say to that?
There's a lot of things I could say. It's been 3 years since we've been at the negotiating table, and it's come down to this last minute thing to where the railroads are now preparing. It seems that they're preparing for this strike. So they're essentially slowing down commerce themselves to prepare for this strike, which I believe that it's more looking like the railroads would like to lock us out instead of letting us go on strike. But we're going to stand tall. We deserve good quality of life issues that aren't being addressed, that weren't addressed in the PEB to our liking. And I think that those are some of the most important aspects of our job, because the other thing I wanted to mention about the narrative, controlling the narrative, the railroads, they're out there telling everybody that, hey, all these other unions, they're settling, they've got tentative agreements out there. Well, the railroad engineers and conductors, they have a different lifestyle.
Yep.
A lot of these other crafts, that we work hand in hand with every day, unfortunately for them, they have somewhat of a schedule, more of a schedule. They usually work at shift work. Our members are on call 24/7, 365. The quality of life issues, they've always been there, but they're just getting worse.
Yeah, and it's not just the railroads who are getting this narrative. I mean, I'm inundated with press releases from groups like the National Association of Wholesale Distributors, who, the blaring press release, distributors call on labor leaders, labor unions to accept deal and put the nation first. Come on, Don, put the nation first. Now, this is what I think people need to understand, and you alluded to it a second ago, that your members, specifically your members, are the ones who are taking the brunt of the negative. They're actually living just to work. When I heard that they're on call 24/7, 365 with only 1 day per month when they can do anything, I'm going, that's insane. How does any company expect anyone to do that? Well, they're the railroad, right?
Right, and I also was a local chairman where I worked on the collective bargaining side, so I had to represent people that were being disciplined for attendance issues. And you get in there with the railroads, and they want to argue that it's a policy that's that's whatever they say goes, and it's like, well, not really. This person has a valid doctor's excuse or something to that nature. I know that we've got plenty of items out there that we can provide to anybody to show that, hey, the railroads are they're taking advantage of their employees and holding essentially their thumb on top of them and saying, no, you need to come to work or else you're going to get fired. So people are going to choose their job over their health. They'll miss doctor's appointments and miss time with their families. I've got a really close friend of mine that walked away from the railroad because he felt that he just missed all of his children's lives growing up. So he wanted to spend more time with his family, and he finally said, you know what, enough is enough.
No, and it goes back to the question, do you live to work or work to live? And, I think most of us, especially in this day, I understand that we work so that we can pay for our lifestyle, so that we can support our families, so that we can have a better future. We don't get up every day of our life just to go to work and be at the beck and call. This is the part that I don't think most people understand, that, you're waiting around for the phone to ring either at home or in a hotel somewhere, 1,000 miles from home, waiting at the behest of these railroads to maybe give you a call. So your life isn't even your own when you're not working, and you're not being compensated for this. I think that has to be brought out into the public as well, because that's indefensible in this day and age with the technology we have. Are you going to tell me, Don, that you can't figure out when the trains are coming? You can't tell me when it's on a freaking track. How hard is it to calculate this?
Yes, the train lineups are horrible. That's one of the main issues we've been looking at for years and trying to get the railroads to be better at, because it's a guessing game. And not only is it a guessing game, when they finally have one in there that actually operates at a certain time, most of the time, they'll go in there and change it, for some unknown reason. So it makes it really hard for these employees to get the proper rest. I've been there, done that. You're up all day. And you're like, well, I'm going to lay down and take a nap. Well, guess what? About the time you lay down and get comfortable, the phone rings. Then you're like, well, maybe if I live close enough to work, I can get another 30 minutes. You're not going to fall asleep when you know that you're going to have to go to work. So
I know that well. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Don Roach. I look at this, Don, and the frustrating part of this is, yesterday we spoke with Jared Cassidy from your union, who brought up an Orwellian kind of name, and maybe you can help me with this: precision scheduling railroading. This sounds like, hey, we're actually going to move into scheduling and doing things. It sounds like, the way he made it sound, that this actually made things a lot worse.
Yes, yeah, it started. I guess it started with the late Hunter Harrison, right? I think I was probably a victim of that when I first started my railroad career in 1998. There was a class of 80 of us that were hired. And then when Hunter Harrison came in from when CN and Grand Trunk Western kind of combined there, he cut half of that class. He's like, we don't need these people. And then it wasn't very much longer that maybe 2 years later, they were hiring people again. So it's like this precision scheduled railroading model works for about 2 or 3 years to help get them the most benefit for their shareholders. But then once the house is burned down, then they got to rebuild from the ground up. And I think that's what you're seeing right now, because there was a really big push back in like 2017 for this precision scheduled railroading that started taking control of these Class 1 railroads again. And it's just now it's on fire, and they want to blame us for it. And that's
and this is the thing that gets me. It's always the workers' fault. It's always I look at this warehousing distributing people putting out this press release, and nowhere in there did they call out Norfolk Southern, nowhere did they call out Union Pacific, nowhere did they call out BNSF, nowhere did they call out CSX. None of that. Not a peep about them. It's all about you. You're responsible for this. And I hope people are hearing what you're saying and going, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like a lifestyle that I would want. It's not a lifestyle I think any worker should have to endure.
right. Yeah, and when they hire people, they usually tell them, you're going to be on call 24/7, work days, nights, weekends, and sometimes some people just walk out. They don't want that type of lifestyle, and some they endure that for a while until they can't any longer. Because it is a very, very harsh lifestyle. It takes a toll on people's health, and we see that day in and day out.
So now the deadline, as I understand, it's the 16th. Is there a possibility of an extension? Do you see any possibility that the administration negotiates something longer? Do you see anything? Do you see anything derailing this inevitable path?
All I can tell you is what I'm seeing firsthand, and all the news reports about the carriers that are starting to embargo the shipments. Starting to secure hazardous material shipments and stuff like that, because by law they have to contain those. Like I said earlier, I think it's looking more and more like the railroads want to lock us out than let us go on strike, just to try to prove a point to say, hey, the railroad or these railroad employees are essentially the ones that are, holding the supply chain hostage. When obviously we haven't gone on strike, we're still at the table. We have a proposal in front of them that they could accept, but they're choosing not to accept that, and they're choosing to slow down commerce right now by embargoing these shipments. So
let me ask you the dumb question, because I have to ask, how much are we talking about here? How much would it cost them to give your members? Now, we're not talking about a lot of people, I don't think. What would it cost to give them the dignity? How much less in profit would this billion-dollar profitable industry, multi-billion-dollar profitable industry, how much less would their shareholders pocket by giving your members dignity and family values that we hear espoused all the time, and saving the health of these folks? How much less profit are we talking about? A couple of pennies, a buck, what?
I don't think it would. You wouldn't even see it if you track their profits that they continue to make year in and or month in and month out. I don't think the shareholders would even notice it. I mean, why can't you afford to give your employees a couple days off a month, or say a couple days to go see your doctor? How is that going to directly impact their bottom line to the degree to where they're worried about their shareholders? I just don't see it. I don't know if anybody else sees it. I think it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. I think it's just grandstanding on their part. And, like I said, they just want to control that narrative and make us be the bad guys.
Now, for years, I've been talking about the railroads because, I think it was 2013 was the first time I had heard that they wanted to go down to a one-person train from the now whopping 2 people you have on a train. When I was a kid, I remember there being multiple, because we used to jump on and off the trains. I know you shouldn't do that, and I'm not advocating for it, but as a kid, I used to do that. Right. And they had multiple people on the train. What happened to all those people who were on the train, shooting salt guns at the kids?
Yeah, the caboose went away. Technology kind of took over. There's a device on the rear of the train now that can place the train into emergency from the head end of the train. So there's a lot of things that went into that, but for the most part, the caboose went away, and so that took away 2 to 3 people.
I used to love the caboose, except when they were shooting at us. So last question: what can we do to help? What do you want from our listeners? What do you want from folks? What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen? Who do we call? Who do we yell at? What do we scream about?
Well, just like we're doing with our members right now, we're putting out legislative blasts for everybody to contact their members in Congress and tell them the truth. Tell them what's really going on, not to listen to the narrative that the railroad's trying to spin on them. That's the biggest thing, because in the end, should this go to a strike or a lockout, Congress is essentially going to be the one that's going to make the decision on which way this goes. And it can go a probably 4 different ways, right? They could impose that PEB recommendation on our members. They could make it worse. They could make it a little bit better. They could put us into binding arbitration, or they could amend the Railway Labor Act and extend the cooling off period like they have in the past. And, that's just going to kick the can down the road, right? So we just want a fair and equitable contract. We want quality of life issues. And it seems like the railroad just doesn't want to give those to us.
Yeah.
Reach out to your legislators.
I hope you'll come back and keep us up to date on what's going on. I wish you guys the best. We're behind you 100%. And I hope our listeners get what this is about. All the nonsense aside, this is about family values and about workers having dignity and respect on the job more than anything. If you want more information, check out their website, smart-union.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Don Rocha, I appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. Seriously, this is one of those moments where it's not rocket science, folks. Not rocket science. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Look, I look at the potential of a strike, and I hope it doesn't happen. I'm hoping they work this out. I'm hoping they come to an agreement, but it's got to be one that the workers get some respect in. And for me, the simple part of this, and we didn't even talk about the healthcare component, the massive increases potentially in healthcare costs, because that's a secondary issue to the respect. And this is what we're hearing in a lot of the organizing campaigns that are going on across the country. Now, I've done organizing work over the years, and I've always said wages are almost never the reason that people join unions these days. Almost never. It's generally respect. It's generally dignity. It's generally employers who mistreat their employees. And I'll tell you, I have not heard of worse treatment than what you get out of for these engineers. Now, I spent 11 years on call working for a trucking company, but you work 6 trips, you got a 48-hour weekend. You work 7 trips, you got a 56-hour weekend. You worked 11 trips, you got a 72-hour weekend. You had the ability to have some flexibility to work and then take time off so that you could plan going to weddings, you could plan going to doctors, you could plan, cutting the grass. You could plan fixing a leaky faucet, whatever. You could make plans. These guys, nothing. And this is where I keep coming back to, this is where that respect part comes. Because as I asked Don, how much would it cost? What kind of money are we talking about? Somebody had to cost this out. Every contract proposal has a costing out feature that says, okay, this is what it's going to cost the company to do this. And the company's going to go, okay, well, we'll give you this, but we want this. That's part of negotiations. This is kind of a red line for the workers where they've had enough. They went through the entire pandemic like this, working like insane people, and they're saying enough. And I don't know that the administration or Congress should undo that. In fact, we should be passing a law. I've always believed no one should be on call. I've always believed that you should never have to be on call. And if it is, it's a 2 hour, 3 hour kind of, that's it. You're not on call indefinitely. There should be a law. We can do that. We have the technology. And I love the fact that they come up with this term, precision scheduling railroading. So Orwellian. When it means you're going to sit by the phone, either in a hotel somewhere miles from home or at home, and not being able to go to a movie, go out to dinner, go do things with your kids without being tethered to the phone. Now, it's much easier today than it was when I was on call because we didn't have cell phones. We were tethered to a hard line or it had a damn beeper, which hardly ever worked right. It's a little easier today, but still, the reality that your future is going to be based on constantly on call, and it's not even going to cost the railroads that much money. When you're talking about as profitable, as wildly profitable as they are, this is one of those profits over people situations, and you've got all these groups who are just dumping on these workers and their unions, going, well, they should do it for the good of the country. They should sacrifice even more. And you've got these workers saying, no, we did sacrifice. Remember, we were the frontline heroes. Remember, we were the essential ones. It's time for you to treat us like such. Now, this could be painful. Yeah, the truth of the matter is, a major disruption in our supply chain like this could be painful. And the administration's got some interesting waters that they're going to have to wade into, because they can't kick this down the curb, down the curb too far, because the railroads are already backing off. I know trucking companies aren't putting trailers on trains because they don't want to get the stuff caught up in a strike where they can't get to it. We're already seeing some disruptions just at the threat of the 16th happening. They've got to come back and they've got to make a choice. And this is one of those moments where, I think Biden's, the right guy for the right moment. He's talking about, labor rights and talking about workers' rights. This is one of those moments where Democrats, this is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to step forward. This is your opportunity to say, you know what? We're not going to let this continue. We're going to make sure that workers have dignity. Is that too much to ask? The reality is, I don't think it is. And this is where lawmakers need to take that kind of living and make that illegal. Stand up for working people. And we as society, we need to not be blinded by the sad state of affairs where we're calling on the workers to continue to sacrifice and struggle. It's nuts to me. But sadly, it's where we are. It is the world in which we find ourselves. But I'm hoping a strike doesn't happen. I'm hoping that we move this in a direction and all of that. It's that simple. But like I said, smart-union.org is the website if you want to check out what their side of it is. And look, if it happens, get the comfortable shoes out. Start walking with those striking workers. Support them. Let's not get into a situation where we're beating them up. Just my thought. I'd love to hear yours. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1971. That was the day that the state police stormed Attica Correctional Facility in New York. 4 days earlier, the inmates had taken over the prison. One guard was killed. The guards were members of AFSCME Council 82. The prisoners demanded improvements to their brutal living conditions in the overcrowded prison. Police retook most of the prison, but the inmates held guards hostage in cell block D. One of the prisoners, Elliot James Barkley, explained the takeover. "We are men, we are not beasts, and we do not depend to be beaten or driven as such. The entire prison populace, that means each and every one of us here, have set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disrespect for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States." When the police stormed the prison, they dropped tear gas from helicopters. They fired 3,000 rounds, firing on prisoners and hostages indiscriminately. They killed 29 inmates and 10 hostages. Police claimed the prisoners had killed the hostages. They also accused the inmates of committing atrocities against the guards. Public outrage swelled against the inmates, including racially charged hate directed at the black prisoners. But autopsies proved that all of those killed had been felled by police bullets. Attica became the rallying cry for those concerned about prison conditions. It has been referenced by many in movies and songs, including John Lennon's Attica State. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
What makes a newspaper great? Many say it's having street-savvy reporters and editors with the integrity to shine the light of investigative journalism on the power structure's abuses. But no, says Fred Ryan, top executive of the Washington Post, the secret is attendance. Ryan, a corporate manager and former Ronald Reagan staffer, was handpicked to be CEO of the legendary paper by Jeff Bezos in 2014 when the Amazon billionaire bought the Post. But on Ryan's watch, readership is in decline, which he blames on newsroom sluggards who don't spend enough time in the office. So he's become the hall monitor, measuring reporters' productivity by their office attendance. Fred seems unaware that a good reporter's real work is out on the beat, not sitting in front of a computer. No doubt he would have fired Woodward and Bernstein for being out of office so often to meet with Deep Throat to uncover Nixon's Watergate scandal. In fairness, though, he apparently has a two-part plan to boost team spirit. 1, eliminate 100 reporters. And 2, judge the output of those remaining by counting the number of video conferences they attend each week. But that's hardly the totality of Ryan's innovations. The big news is that he's hired not one but 2 high-dollar PR firms to create a cutting-edge, quote, branding strategy for the Post. Already, they've come up with a spiffy new corporate slogan, "We don't just break news, we break ground." Wow, how great is that? Never mind that some wags have changed the second line to "We break wind." This is Jim Hightower saying, when overpaid incompetents like Ryan substitute slogans and computer metrics for real solutions, they're admitting that they are the problem. They don't know how to motivate and manage a creative workforce. They should resign in embarrassment.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So potentially days away from either a strike or a lockout. Not sure how the rail situation's going to go. Hopefully they hammer this out. Hopefully the workers get the dignity and the respect that they deserve and are demanding. And hopefully the political system doesn't get in the way and stick it to the workforce. Like I keep hearing, if those workers should just take it. No, how about these really profitable companies? How about them giving a little bit? Anyway, here to share some thoughts on what the possibility of a strike might look like and, historically what that's meant here in the country. That's why I've asked Eric Loomis to come talk with us. Professor, historian, lawyers, guns and money blogger, also the author of one of the most important books ever written, A History of America in 10 Strikes. Highly recommended to everyone. Eric, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you.
So potentially a rail strike, a rail lockout. Thoughts?
Well, I think that a couple thoughts. I mean, one is that we often forget about the railroads when it comes to the importance of transportation in the American economy. There's a big focus on truckers, big focus on the airlines. Usually less of a focus on supplies on the giant ships. That's changed in the era of COVID and supply chain difficulties. We often forget about the trains, but trains make up still a very large portion of freight movement in this country, and I think that more importantly, this is a relatively well-paid job, but the workers themselves are not really fighting that much over over wages. It's that the working conditions are awful. Yep. That people are quitting left and right. I mean, that people are saying, despite the money, this work is so long and so difficult and sometimes so dangerous that they're just not going to do it. And this then places additional stress on the rest of the workforce. And so, like a lot of strikes I think we've seen in the last few years, it's a lot more about dignity than it is just about pay.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been talking to the folks from the different unions about. It's about life-work balance. It's about health care, and it's about safety on the job. In fact, yesterday we talked with Jared Cassidy from the Smart Union, saying, look, over the last 10 days they've had 3 deaths. So to your point, it is a very dangerous job.
Yeah, and there's no reason for it. And I think that one thing that's worth noting is that American railroads have always been more dangerous than those in Europe. I mean, and we're talking going back to the 19th century, that American railroads have traditionally resisted basic safety upgrades. They put profit over workers' lives. And this is, of course, less people are dying today, or fewer people, I guess I should say, are dying today than did in 1880 or something like that. However, the total number of workers that they employ is also far, far lower. So we don't hear about it as often as we used to, these deaths. But 3 deaths in 10 days, I mean, that's just utterly unacceptable.
Absolutely.
And there's no, it's hardly unreasonable. For workers to say that they're not going to take their lives, and they're not going to put their lives at risk every time they go on the job. That it's time for the companies to step up and put the money in that needs to be invested for more employees and for better working conditions.
Now, to highlight your point, I mean, back in the 70s, when I remember early 80s, when I remember jumping on and off trains as a kid. And I don't advocate for that, but I did that as a younger man. There were multiple people on trains. I think they said back then there were 7 people on any given train. Now there are 2, and the industry wants to go down to 1 person on a train, which is just mind blowing. That you're talking trains that are miles long and much longer than they've ever been. One person now is going to be responsible for all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. I mean, and I think that just on a basic humanity level, I mean, what happens if something happens to that one single worker on the train? I mean, the guy, he just gets sick, doesn't even have to be that he breaks his leg or something. He just gets sick. He's about to fall asleep. He needs to use the bathroom. I mean, there are a lot of pretty basic issues, which is why you don't put a single person on a job like that, especially as you point out, the trains are so large. And of course, the other side of this is that the train companies are tremendously profitable. Since the pandemic has started, a lot of the train companies have reported record earnings. And so it's not as if, it's a situation where the train companies are struggling. This is just sheer grotesque profit taking at its most greedy.
Absolutely. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Eric Loomis, professor, historian, lawyers, guns and money blogger, also the author of one of my favorite books, A History of America and 10 Strikes. We'll get links out on social media how you can pick that up, preferably Powell's books. Do that. But Eric, we're in this moment where that we got an election coming up, and I see us and I've been saying this for the last couple of days. as we are planning to embark on a multi-state tour to get into rural areas and talk about working conditions and talk about the American dream and how that was destroyed and maybe how we reclaim some of it. It comes back to me to the labor movement. It comes back to workers being able to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, as we see in the railroads. And I think the history of what built the middle class, what built that prosperous working class of my grandparents' generation, I think is so important, and why a book like yours in this moment really important.
Well, I mean, thanks. I think that the hope here in writing a book like this, I guess, was to provide a little bit of deeper information than most people would usually get about the labor movement, to do so in a way that's pretty accessible. And I think it's necessary right now because we see, for instance, record high approval ratings, at least in theory, for unions, which doesn't mean necessarily that everybody's going to run out and join a union, but there's an openness to it that I think my generation, when it was younger, I'm a Gen X guy, and in the late 80s and in the 90s, it was a very anti-union time, and that had kind of seeped into the general populace, and I think I saw that a lot in my generation, whereas the younger generation today is a lot more open to the idea of unionization. They don't really see that American dream working for them, and that's for people who did not go to college and people who have gone to college. It kind of spreads through the working class, and the kind of growing college educated working class, and you see the Starbucks strikes and things of this nature, and the idea here is that people like the idea of unions, but they don't necessarily know too much about how the labor movement was built, and so that's what you try to do, is provide a little bit more information, because the idea here being that if you can learn a little bit about the way the labor movement was built, and you can also learn about how it succeeded and how it failed, there are lessons that we can potentially apply to how we're organizing today.
Yeah, and look, I look at the younger generation who watch their parents, suffer and struggle and deal with, clinging to that American dream idea that if you work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead, and they watch their parents not get ahead, and they watch their parents continually get screwed over. And I think the lesson that they've learned from it is there's got to be a better way.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're getting messages, if you are there's kind of like two messages going on here for two different groups, right? If you are a member of the working class that is not going on to college, right? You're kind of told from the beginning today almost that if you don't go to college, there's not much of a economic hope for you, that you're not going to get that kind of stable job. You're kind of shuffled aside, and that is it's both morally and politically unacceptable. I mean, you can't build a stable society by saying that everybody has to get so-called higher education, because some people's brains are hardwired to do certain sorts of jobs or certain kinds of skills, and others have skills that are more college oriented, and one is not better than the other. And the kind of just disinterest in an industrial policy for people who have not gone to college is disastrous, and we've seen this for decades. And then if you are going on to college, you're told, oh, go ahead, take out those gigantic amount of student loans. It'll all pay off in the end. And, over the years it might, but you're talking about then, walking out of college with tens of thousands or sometimes even hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And, you look at, say, the Starbucks workers, for instance, who have been unionizing, and a lot of them are college educated young people who are making $14 an hour at Starbucks, and that can't even service their loans, and so they're kind of in like a semi-permanent debt peonage. It's so I think that almost all sectors of young people today are being sold a future that doesn't look very bright for them.
Yeah, and this is where we're going to embark upon this tour that we're going to take under the premise that, look, you need to have a mix of jobs. You need to have ones that workers can get a living wage and support a family and do the things of past generations. And I argue you do that through our unions, and you do that by undoing the bad policies of the past. And look, I think we're at a moment, and I talked about this yesterday. I think we're at a crossroads moment where, the Biden administration is moved on some infrastructure investments. They've moved on reshoring some manufacturing, promoting unions and all of that. I fear one election undoes all that and well, keeps us on this path of desperation, poverty, and kind of the Hunger Games, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the Republican Party is basically running on these cultural issues such as, overturning abortion, hating still hating on gay people and refusing to pass a bill that would guarantee gay marriage. This ridiculousness, claiming that teachers are indoctrinating kids into so-called critical race theory in schools because they're trying to distract working people from voting on economic issues, because on economic issues, Democrats have the back of workers, especially the Biden administration. Admittedly, Democrats have not always been very good on these issues, and we saw that in the Clinton years, we saw that in the Obama years to some extent. But as you point out, Biden has made a lot of positive gains and a lot of positive policy moves as president. And you're right. The only way that continues is that Democrats keep winning because, you have an extremist Republican Party that is deeply dedicated to overturning all rights for workers. Every year there's a Supreme Court case that does this a little bit more that is going to continue. They're just kind of biding their time right now, waiting for Republicans to take back over so they can re-up the war on workers.
Yeah, and I look at Pennsylvania, where I live, as right on the front lines of that, because we've got a gubernatorial candidate in Doug Mastriano who has said, immediately right to work is going to pass here. They're going to cut education funding in half. They're going to, if they don't like the results of elections, they're going to just throw those out and overturn elections. I mean, antithetical to democracy, antithetical to what this country has always stood for. This is a guy who's with one of the two major parties in this country, running to be the governor of one of the higher unionized states in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a little bit like, in the South after the Reconstruction. So here we're talking about the 1880s and 1890s and 1900s, where because of that elites determined that they were going to hold on to power no matter what. And so they would disenfranchise black voters. They would disenfranchise white voters if they needed to, if they were poor and weren't voting the way that the elites wanted. And they basically killed democracy in the South for 80 years. And applying that at a national level is pretty clearly the Republican Party's overarching goal right now. And that's why you see, the first thing Republicans do when they take control over states that still have strong unions is get rid of the unions as much as they can by passing these so-called right to work laws, because unions are the one institution that has organized working class people across races around economic questions. So you get rid of that. That's a big blow to people who support democracy. And then you push through these anti-democratic reforms or changes, I should say, destroy elections and basically ensconce yourself in power for the next generation. I mean, that's what they did in the South in 1900, and that's what the Republican Party and people like Mastriano want to do in 2022.
So as we embark on this trip, one of the frames that I've been saying for a very long time, we got to get out of this thinking of everything as right, left, red, blue, whichever hat you bought in the last election is where we have to be, when the reality is it's always top down. It's always the wealth class versus everyone else. And they use these divisive issues to tear us apart. So as we go into these rural communities where Democrats have failed to make inroads or even attempt to make inroads, what do you think plays in those areas? What direction do you think people should take?
Yeah, it's tough now. I mean, I think that Democrats have largely ceded rural areas. I think the only really rural areas in America anymore that Democrats play strongly in are the Latino and indigenous areas of the American West, such as in northern New Mexico and parts of Colorado. On the reservations, and then in Vermont and Western Massachusetts. In pretty much all other parts of the country, rural areas are mostly forgotten about by Democrats. There were some very bad policy decisions, but what this has also created is a kind of perfect storm of misinformation, violence, and increasing and growing intimidation of people who are Democrats in these areas, because being afraid to run for office, being afraid to stand up with a sign, being afraid to put a bumper sticker on your car, an actual legitimate fear of violence. And I think that the first thing that has to happen is that Democrats have to come together, I think, in these areas with support of state parties and support of people in the cities to create a kind of mutual aid almost in these cities and towns. I mean, I know Western Pennsylvania very, very well. I lived out in Clarion County for a while. My wife lived out there for many years. She was teaching at the university there, and Democrats are afraid to even show their face because they are legitimately fearful of violence. And so I think that it has to be a combination of policies for the working class, but also a bigger strategy to show that Democrats are willing to stand up for their beliefs and not just allow Republicans to intimidate them, because the only way you stand up to bullies is to push back.
Absolutely.
It takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, and the premise that I've come up with, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, is that when we were strongest as a country, we had strong unions in these rural areas. These factories that were the glue that held these communities together were heavily unionized, where workers had rights and shared prosperity. And as that was broken through bad trade deals, through horrible tax policy, and through Wall Street and corporate greed, that's all been broken up. And the 80s brought us hyper individualism, hooray for me and the heck with everyone else, greed is good, and all of that stuff. And we've been ripped apart.
Yeah, I think that you really see that if you go deep dives into these regions, that rural areas that were formerly very strongly Democratic and have now become very strongly Republican, or even extremist right. Places like northern Idaho, for instance, but also rural western Pennsylvania, and a lot of Ohio and places like this, increasingly in northern Minnesota. That's exactly right. I mean, basically, you destroy the economy, which then destroys or attacks the culture of these places. You tell anybody who can get out of there to get out of there. You leave behind bitterness and anger, and you also take away the institutions that can contribute to making sure that people don't get suckered into voting for white supremacy, that make sure that people realize that they have things in common with other working people in America. And that the unions is what did that. And the Democratic Party not that long ago had a real base in rural America, and that's all gone now. And Democrats deserve a lot of the blame for that, particularly in the Carter and Clinton years, where they laid the groundwork for this. Your Larry Summers and Rahm Emanuels of the world, who just didn't care about these areas, and we're seeing the wages of that error today.
Yeah. So last question I've got for you: any suggestions, any advice as we venture into these areas? Because I think you have to tell the story that people have clung to, which is where I think Trump was the blind squirrel that found the nut. That people want to recreate what that golden era was of economic prosperity and opportunity and identity. So any advice?
Well, the only thing I would say is the same thing I would say to lots of people who are wondering what's going on in these areas, which is you have to listen, right? You have to listen. You have to have the conversations. They can be hard conversations, and you can't just throw somebody aside because they don't agree. They have a position on some issue, a social issue, let's say, that you might find to be disturbing, whether it's race or sexuality or whatever. You have to build toward common ground. You have to meet people where they are rather than where you would want them to be. And that's a matter, these are basic organizing principles, and it's a matter of listening and having the conversations. And a lot of people just don't feel listened to. Yeah. And they have a good reason to feel that way.
No, see, I think the workplace is where we have to start, organize there, build that kind of cohesiveness and that kind of community, and everything else I think will fall in the line. But Eric, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the thoughts. As always, great stuff, my friend.
Hey, thank you very much.
Good stuff. Eric Loomis. Make sure you check out the book, The History of America in 10 Strikes. One of the best reads out there. We'll get links out on social media. You can check that out. We'll take a quick break. Right back. Remember, if you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Never miss a moment. Share with your friends. Like all of that. Right back after this.
Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2013. Riot police used tear gas and water cannons to clear out Zocalo Square in Mexico City. The square was occupied by protesting teachers. The teachers had been on strike for weeks. They wanted changes made to educational reforms that had been passed by the Mexican government. The education reforms included new performance-related testing for teachers, but the reforms did little to address the economic disparity faced by many school children. The evaluation tests did not take into account the difficult conditions for teachers in the poorest regions of Mexico. The teachers worried the tests would lead to mass layoffs. Police wanted to clear Zocalo Square before Mexico's annual independence celebration. Most protesters left peacefully. However, some remained. Police, using armored vehicles and helicopters, clashed with the remaining protesters. Officers tore down protesters' temporary shelters and put out small bonfires. Protesters responded by throwing projectiles at the police. The police arrested many of the remaining protesting teachers. After the square was cleared, a BBC reporter noted that police had achieved their goal. Still, the reporter added, the sight of riot police and armored vehicles in the country's most emblematic plaza is not the image of unity the government wanted to portray hours before President Peña Nieto celebrated his first Independence Day as Mexico's president. If it sounds familiar, it is, because teachers in the United States are dealing with similar issues. Teachers, through their unions in both the United States and Mexico, fight for a quality education for all children.
We don't need no education.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Remember, don't forget to grab the podcast. Never miss a moment. New Axios Ipsos poll out. They find a third, 33% of Americans, 1/3, prefer a strong, unelected leader. Don't want any of those weaklings who are elected. Don't want any of that. We want good authoritarian presidents who should be able to remove judges whenever they darn well feel like it. This is the era of the Trumpkins. This is the era of, and this is frightening because, when you throw that out there and go, should a president be able to remove a judge when they make a decision they don't agree with? A third of the people, yeah, we should get rid of them. And, and it kind of makes you wonder because we were now finding out more about the end of the Trump era where his plan was just to, stay. His plan was to not leave the White House. His plan was to stay because he understood that even if the Supreme Court had ruled he had to go, who was going to throw him out? After all, he's the chief executive. That's where the order would go. And we were really in a moment. But isn't it frightening that in a country that talks about being a democratic place, the rule of law, that elections matter, that the ballot box is sacred, that at least that's what I grew up understanding this country to be, that literally a third of the country was like, we don't need those stinking elections. Bring on the fascism. That's frightening. That is frightening. To me, just that simple. But, I got to be honest, not surprising. As long as, and this is where I got to think this breaks down. When you ask them, well, what do you think of the president that you didn't vote for having the same power? I got to think that they would be against that. It's one of those, it's good for me, but not for thee. Interesting times. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. As I said, if you miss any of the program, make sure you grab the podcast, share it with your friends and neighbors. Never miss a moment. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.